The title of this lecture is Rerum Novarum. Rerum Novarum is a papal encyclical authored by Pope Leo XIII. Leo was elected Pope in 1878 and reigned until his death in 1903. He has been called by posterity as the Pope of the Workers, largely because of his attention, the attention that he paid to the abuses and problems created by the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. In his encyclical Rerum Novarum on the condition of labor, Pope Leo XIII exposited the Catholic view of social justice and the importance of economic relationships. Written in 1891 at the apogee of the Industrial Revolution, Rerum Novarum addresses the conditions under which laborers live and work, the obligations employers have toward them, and the corresponding duties of laborers to employers and to society. In his attempt to define the rights and obligations of the wealthy and workers, Leo XIII addresses several specific issues. Of particular concern to the Church at this time was the rise of socialism, with its forceful rejection of the private ownership of property. In response to this, the Pope asserts the inviolability of private property. This inviolability is rooted in the dignity of the human person and his or her creation in the image of God. Those fruits which the earth produces for the sustenance of human life emerge only after human labor has been expended. It is this expenditure of labor upon a specific area of the earth that makes that area into a personal, private possession. It becomes the property of the individual because the person, quote, leaves, as it were, the impress of his own personality, end quote. The mandate to subdue and have dominion over the earth makes the apportionment of the earth both inevitable and just. In fact, Leo XIII suggests that the alienation from creation that resulted from the sin of Adam is actually healed by labor, and that private property is a confirmation of this healed relationship. He writes, the laborer, which has thus altered and improved it, that is creation, becomes so truly a part of itself as to be in a great measure indistinguishable, inseparable from it. End quote. An unbreakable bond is thus established between the person and that which the person cultivates within creation. Another point that Leo XIII stresses is the necessity of a transcendent and uniquely Christian referent in formulating solutions to social problems. In this connection, the first thing the Pope emphasizes is the relativity of material things in relation to humankind's eternal destiny. He writes, quote, "The great truth which we learn from nature herself is also the grand Christian dogma on which religion rests as on its base, that when we have done with this present life, then we shall really begin to live." End quote. So in relation to eternity, the possession of money and material comforts, or lack thereof, is of no import. The only important thing, says Leo, is to use them aright. Having asserted the inviolability of private property, while at the same time insisting upon its relative value in relation to eternity, Leo XIII has set the context in which to articulate the Church's vision of a just economic order. He posits a distinction between a right to the possession of money and, on the other hand, a right to use money as one pleases. While a person has no obligation to give to others what he or she requires for himself or herself, he or she has a duty to give out of their surplus once necessities have been met. While not going so far as to insist that civil laws conform to Christian charity, Leo does indicate that charity, which is embodied in the law of Christ, has an overarching claim upon the individual's obedience, and thus human laws, quote, must give place to the laws and judgment of Christ, end quote. Leo then expounds what later Catholic social teaching came to refer to as the preferential option for the poor. It is the chief end of society to make people virtuous, argues Leo, but virtuous action requires bodily and external commodities. Leo continues, quote, "Justice, therefore, demands that the interests of the poorer population be carefully watched over by the administration, so that they who contribute so largely to the advantage of the community may themselves share in the benefits they create. That being housed, clothed, and enabled to support life, they find their existence less hard and more endurable. It follows that whatever shall be conducive to the well-being of those who work should receive favorable consideration. End quote. Leo then connects this with the importance of virtue in society. He stresses that in order for society to prosper, virtue must be fostered. Private property is a necessary condition for the fostering and development of virtue. However, private property is simply the affirmation that one is entitled to enjoy the fruits of one's labor. Therefore, acknowledging the right to enjoy the fruits of one's labor is a precondition of virtue, and hence a precondition of a prosperous society. Working people, however, are in a special position of vulnerability. They are vulnerable to being deprived of the enjoyment of the fruits of their labor. In this respect, the virtue of the vast majority of citizens is jeopardized. Therefore, concludes Leo, the state has an obligation to give added preference to the interests of the working class in order to safeguard society itself. It is in light of these considerations that the rights of workers are to be understood. For instance, the transcendental referent by which relations between workers and employers are to be established necessitates that in all working contracts and agreements, quote, there be allowed proper rest for soul and body, end quote. No agreement that ignores this allowance can be considered just. For, Leo continues, quote, for it can never be right or just to require on the one side, or to promise on the other, the giving up of those duties which a man owes to God and to himself. So what we have here is Leo insisting that a reasonable work week be established for workers so that they have time not only for their duties to God on Sunday, but basic human rest and recreation necessary to the well-being of body and soul. Also, the right to enjoy the fruits of one's labor and so progress and virtue necessitates a living wage for the worker. Leo writes, quote, there is a dictative nature more imperious and more ancient than any bargain between man and man, that the remuneration must be enough to support the wage earner in reasonable and frugal comfort, end quote. So the mere fact that a wage has been accepted by the worker, often out of resignation because he can find no better wages anywhere else, does not thereby mean that the wage is just, nor must the wage be determined by the so-called law of supply and demand. It has to be determined by a sense of the legitimate basic human needs of the worker and his family. Finally, the Pope exposits principles for the formation of workers' associations. In this area, Leo is in part responding to the allure of socialist labor organizations. He writes, many of these societies are in the hands of invisible leaders and are managed on principles far from compatible with Christianity and the public well-being, end quote. Indeed, workers are often forced into such organizations. In order to counteract the socialist labor movement, Leo gives certain principles intended to guide organizations of Christian workers. Although organized to better the condition of workers in body, mind, and property, says the Pope, workers' organizations need to maintain a distinctively Christian character. For in order to be truly effective in establishing social justice, they must promote that morality and virtue upon which the prosperity of society depends. In particular, workers' associations are to be centers of religious instruction where a worker learns, quote, what is his duty to God, what to believe, what to hope for, and how to work out his own salvation, end quote. These are not necessarily the same thing as labor unions, which are organized for the sake of collective bargaining. But at the same time, Leo does not preclude this function for workers' associations. This is perhaps Leo's way of bringing an authentic Christian sensibility to the emerging labor movement. Now, in conclusion, I have for you a couple of questions to ponder. First, how seriously does society today take the principles set forth in Rerum Novarum? And second, is the political climate in the United States, for example, such that the implementation of Leo's teachings is achievable? Thank you.